brave explorers of the eerie and abandoned. In today's episode, we delve into the chilling real-life tales of 4 true, creepy, abandoned places. From creaky old mansions to long-forsaken factories, each location harbors a story steeped in mystery that will send shivers down your spine. Prepare to uncover what lies behind locked doors and shattered windows. As we journey into the shadows, remember, these stories are not for the faint of heart. So, set your lighting, steady your nerves, and let's embark on our haunting journey through 4 true, creepy, abandoned places, horror stories. This happened when I was growing up in the late 90s. My family lived in the suburbs, surrounded by a lot of forests. On the weekends, I often explored some of the trails and creeks. I wasn't the most popular kid in school back then. There were a few guys in my high school who I was kind of friends with, but it seemed I wasn't a real member of their group. One of those guys was Brent. He was a bigger guy, possibly a year older than the rest of us. It's possible he was held back a year because he wasn't the smartest. He stood at least 6 inches taller than the rest of us, with shaggy brown hair, and was a little overweight, but strong. One Friday afternoon in late October, as I was getting ready to head home from school, Brent approached me on the sidewalk leading out of the parking lot. He told me that one of the guys had found an old abandoned house in the woods, and they were all planning to check it out that night. He invited me along, thrilled at being included in their plans. I tried to play it cool and told Brent I was in. He instructed me to meet him at 8 p.m. at the corner of Main and Poplar Street in our town, close to the woods. After dinner, I told my mom I was going out with friends, but didn't provide any further details. A common practice back then. My parents generally let me go anywhere without much information. I walked down to the meeting spot, feeling excited and carrying a backpack with a flashlight, an extra sweatshirt, and a few beers I'd taken from my dad. I arrived early, but saw Brent already there waiting. "Hey man, where are the others?" I asked. "They'll be there." "Come on, let's go," he replied. Although a bit confused, I followed his lead into the woods. As we ventured in, it got really dark. The sun was almost down, and the thick trees blocked any moonlight. I couldn't understand why we couldn't wait for the others, who all lived close by. Nonetheless, I was eager to impress the guys with the beer I'd brought. As we walked, I held my flashlight while Brent carried a machete, slashing away shrubs. The temperature dropped with the setting sun, prompting me to don my extra sweatshirt. We walked for about half an hour in near silence, which was odd considering Brent and I weren't the closest, but I assumed it didn't matter since everyone was supposed to be there. However, as we continued deeper into the woods without any sign of the abandoned house, I began to feel uneasy. It wasn't just that we were lost, which we clearly were, but something about the situation felt off. I asked Brent how much farther it was and suggested maybe we should turn back. He brushed off my concerns, insisting we were close. As we continued, it became undeniable that we were wandering aimlessly. Then, we entered a clearing in the woods. The trail was faint at best, but our lights were bright. There was a small fire pit that looked recently used, alongside a pile of empty beer cans and other trash. Brent stopped and turned to me, his gaze unsettling as the blade of his machete caught the glow from my flashlight, occasionally blinding me. Is this it?" I mumbled. He didn't answer, but maintained eye contact. By then, it was pitch dark, and our flashlights were the only thing keeping us from complete darkness. I was scared, beginning to doubt there was any abandoned house at all. After an extremely awkward minute, Brent lunged at me, tackling me to the ground. Within seconds, he had me pinned, the machete at my throat. He dropped his flashlight, which landed next to me. Everything happened so fast, I hardly knew what hit me. I begged him to let me go, though I can't remember the exact words. As he was about to swing at me, I turned off my flashlight and reached over to turn off his as well. In the sudden, complete darkness, he was confused, allowing me to squirm out. Breathing heavily, I could sense Brent nearby, the darkness disorienting. But I didn't dare turn on my light until I was sure I could get away. I walked in a random direction in complete darkness, Brent's screams echoing like an animal. It then dawned on me that he couldn't find his flashlight after our fight. Otherwise, he would have come after me. Eventually, his screams quieted, and I felt safe enough to turn on my flashlight. Surprisingly, I was not far from a trail. It took over an hour, but I finally made it back to the street, shaken and realizing I had pissed my pants. Instead of going home, I drank the 2 beers in my bag at a local park, then waited. By midnight, I decided to head home, walking down the sidewalk as it began to rain. By the time I got home, it was pouring and cold. I was relieved my family was in bed. I didn't want anyone to see me like that. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and the realization that Brent might have been out there all night in the cold rain. Despite everything, I didn't wish this on him. By Monday, everyone knew Brent was missing. I stayed silent, dealing with guilt for years, but eventually came to terms with it. I'm now 25. And even though these events happened 11 years ago, they're still vivid in my memory. By far the creepiest experience I've ever had. When I was 14, my family moved into a house in the middle of a cane field, accessible by a dirt road. Surrounded by cane, I often went jogging with my dog, Jet, early in the morning and late in the afternoons, as exercise was my thing. Every day was essential for maintaining my fitness routine, especially after we moved into a house surrounded by cane. I needed to find a new track, and luckily, from my bedroom window on the 2nd story, I noticed a dirt road across the main road, seemingly perfect for my jogs. One afternoon around 5:30, I decided to check it out. The road was long, narrow, and bordered by towering rows of cane. About 15 minutes in, the main road was out of sight, and the track led me slightly curved towards another house, visible only by its roof over the high cane. As I got closer, I noticed a little boy in a red shirt sitting on the roof, around 5 or 6 years old. I was bewildered about how he got up there and if his parents were aware. I stopped jogging, not wanting to trespass or encounter any unfriendly pets, and turned back home. Upon returning, I asked my dad about the family living up that dirt road. He looked perplexed and informed me that it was an old workhouse used by farmers for storage, insisting no one lived there. Confused, I questioned my reality, wondering if I had imagined the little boy. The next morning, I took my sister Gemma with me, leaving the dog at home to jog back to the house. As we approached, no boy was in sight, but as we got close, the house's dilapidated and possibly burnt condition was evident, with large, square gaps where windows once were and a murky lake nearby. The whole place was undeniably creepy, littered with old farming equipment. Gemma suddenly pointed towards a small room downstairs through a smashed hole in the window, and there he was, the little boy just sitting there. We were frozen in shock for a moment before running back home to tell our parents. Despite both Gemma and I insisting on what we saw, our parents brushed it off. Undeterred and perhaps foolishly, we returned that afternoon with our dog Jet. He immediately took off running behind the house, forcing us to follow. We walked around the back, starting to search for him. The whole situation felt increasingly eerie, like we were drawn into something beyond our understanding. Ascending the old rickety stairs was a nerve-wracking ordeal. The creaking under each step only heightened my fear. Gemma, braver than I, reached the top before me and immediately called out in shock. "Oh my God, what is it?" "Tori, you have to see this." Despite my trepidation, I followed her inside through the missing front door, feeling an overwhelming sense of unease. We found Jet sitting still, his gaze fixed on a large cardboard box in the center of the room. The box was filled to the brim with videotapes, an eerie collection that seemed out of place. As Gemma reached to grab a tape, a series of quick, heavy footsteps sounded from the front of the house, as if someone were rushing towards us. Panic took over, and we fled the house, the late afternoon sky turning dark and the rain beginning to pour. As we ran, I glanced back to see the silhouette of a large man watching us from the window. We arrived home breathless and drenched, recounting our terrifying experience to my parents. Dad was curious about the videotapes, but Mom was dismissive, not one to entertain notions of the paranormal. Despite our fear, Dad suggested a nighttime drive back to the house, and inexplicably, we agreed. The drive was eerie, with only the headlights illuminating the gravel road. The house seemed even more menacing at night, like something out of a horror movie. As we sat in the car, headlights trained on the house. A gunshot rang out, startling us to our core. Dad spun the car around in a panic, but then froze. Looking ahead, I saw why. Sitting perfectly upright on our tire tracks was a bullet shell, a clear warning that we were not welcome. We never returned to that house. I started jogging on a different track, and thankfully had no further incidents. But the questions about the tapes and the man who guarded them haunted me for years. This harrowing encounter happened nearly 30 years ago and remains one of the most disturbing incidents of my childhood. Around the same time, a schoolmate, Greg, went missing. He was the nerdy, beloved kid in class, known for his thick, taped glasses and computer skills. On the day he disappeared, he and some friends encountered a strange man while walking through the woods after school. None of them thought much of it at the time, but Greg never made it home. The mystery of his disappearance, along with the chilling events at the abandoned house, left a lasting impact on me and our small town. The group made it out of the woods, but then Greg took a different turn, while the others went straight. That was the last anyone ever saw of him. He seemed to vanish without a trace. The man in the woods was the only clue, but his involvement was uncertain. The police searched extensively, but nothing turned up. Our neighborhood went into a long period of vigilance, and I wasn't allowed out of adult sight for months. Eventually, life resumed its course. 4 years later, at 16, I was in my second year of high school, still close with my primary school friends, Johnny and Dale. We often hung out in Dale's basement, playing video games, or roamed around looking for a party, or just relaxing in the park. One afternoon, we decided to take our bikes out, riding through woods and canola fields, with old farmhouses dotting the landscape. These were remnants of smaller family farms that had been sold off and were now falling into disrepair. Boredom struck, and Johnny suggested we explore one of the dilapidated farmhouses. Despite the potential for trouble due to trespassing concerns, curiosity got the better of us. We approached a large farmhouse, noting its woody siding and the absence of paint, its roof's shingles curled and missing, and its windows all boarded up. Warning signs were plastered around, but no fence prevented our approach. The front door was securely padlocked, so we circled to the back, finding similarly reinforced windows and doors. However, upon closer inspection, Johnny discovered that the back door's large padlock had been cut. Surprised but feeling fortunate, we ventured inside. The kitchen felt like a time capsule from the 70s or 80s, with a coffee cup still sitting on the table, everything blanketed in a thick layer of dust. We treaded carefully, leaving footprints behind. While Dale and I explored the living room, Johnny ventured off towards a bedroom. The living room was dark, lit only by slivers of light creeping around the boarded windows. The eerie quiet of the house enveloped us as we moved cautiously, the sense of trespassing adding to our unease. We hadn't intended to find anything in particular, just curious kids looking for an adventure. But with each creaking step, the weight of the house's history and the stories it might hold seemed to press in around us, igniting our imaginations and fears alike. As Dale and I stood in the dimly lit living room, our voices hushed amidst the eerie quiet. Johnny's urgent call drew us to one of the ground floor bedrooms. The room had a bed frame, but seemed like it might have been an office at one point. Johnny stood near the doorway, silently pointing to something on the floor. There, amidst the dust and debris, lay a pair of glasses broken in the middle, fixed with a piece of tape. The sight sent a chill down my spine, as it did for all of us. We immediately thought of Greg, our friend who had gone missing years ago. Without a word, we left everything untouched, quietly exiting the house and leaving it as we found it. The urgency to confirm if the glasses belonged to Greg propelled us home. The broken lock on the back door weighed on my mind. Could Greg or someone else have broken in? Once home, I told my parents about the discovery. They were skeptical, but agreed to inform the police. I wasn't allowed to accompany them, but I eagerly awaited any news. A few days later, the police confirmed that along with the glasses, they found a jacket belonging to Greg in the house. It was the first significant lead in years. But despite extensive searching, no further trace of Greg was found. The mystery of what happened in that farmhouse and Greg's fate still haunts me. On a different note, living in New Zealand offers plenty of opportunities for hiking and exploring. One evening, I decided to venture out and complete a full track, passing by an old abandoned railway used for glowworm tours, but now a rusting relic. As the afternoon turned to dusk, I approached an old tunnel along the track, armed with just my lantern. The tunnel, abandoned for years, stretched no more than 500 meters. Inside, every step echoed, amplifying the lonely, unsettling atmosphere. I thought I heard someone following me, the sound of breathing close behind. I stopped, turning quickly with my lantern. But there was nothing, just the faint light of the tunnel's entrance. As I continued, the sense of being followed persisted. And then, amidst my own footsteps and heavy breathing, a whisper broke through. "Get out," need for further warning. I took off, rushing back towards the light, my heart pounding against my chest. The experience, so intense and frightening, was a stark reminder of the mysteries and dangers that can lurk in such abandoned places. Whether driven by imagination or something more, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being unwelcome and threatened, a sensation all too familiar from past experiences. As I sprinted through the narrow tunnel, the footsteps seemed to keep pace behind me, intensifying my fear. The daylight at the end of the tunnel grew larger, promising safety. But then I tripped, falling hard onto my stomach. The presence felt nearer than ever, and as I struggled to rise, hindered by pain in my shoulder and legs that refused to cooperate, I felt an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. Covered in mud and aching, I finally stumbled out into the daylight, walking along the railway like a scene from The Walking Dead. At the small station, I collapsed onto a bench, stretching my aching limbs. As I looked up, my heart stopped. There, on the platform, stood a man in brown overalls and a white shirt, his appearance dirty and unkempt. Despite my large frame and injured state, I've never run so fast in my life. Now, sitting in the safety of my car, I'm trying to make sense of what just happened. I know I could take photos of the place, and it's not difficult to access. But after such a terrifying experience, I'll only return if absolutely necessary. The echoes of the footsteps, the whisper, and the figure on the platform linger in my mind, leaving me with more questions than answers and a profound sense of unease.